Imagine, it's the 70s, the height of the Cold War. A faint scent of cigar smoke hangs in the air of an office. You are the director of the CIA. On your massive, polished mahogany desk lies a heavy folder stamped Top Secret. Inside is a detailed description of a top-secret Soviet nuclear facility in Semipalatinsk, building schematics, the layout of underground bunkers, an image of a giant gantry crane that has yet to appear on any satellite photograph. This is critically important information capable of changing the global balance of power overnight. But it's the source of this data that sends an icy chill down your spine. It didn't come from an undercover agent, not from a KH-9 hexagon spy satellite, and not from a radio intercept. The source of this information was an American, sitting in a sterile, soundproof, windowless room in Maryland, thousands of miles from the target. He had nothing but a piece of paper and a pencil. He simply looked in, with the power of his mind. He performed what physicists at Stanford would later call remote viewing. Now, realize this isn't fiction. This isn't a Hollywood movie script. This is cold, documented reality, recorded in thousands of declassified pages from CIA and DIA archives. From 1972 to 1995, the United States government invested over $20 million in a top-secret program. It went through several code names, the most famous of which was Stargate. 22 years. Over 40 specially selected and trained individuals, referred to in official reports as viewers. Hundreds of real intelligence missions, from locating hostages to tracking Soviet submarines. And all of it was based on a phenomenon that orthodox science considers impossible: remote viewing. This raises the central paradoxical question: why would the most powerful and technologically advanced country in the world invest so much time and taxpayer money in what is commonly considered charlatanry? The answer is hidden in archives that were long a closely guarded secret. But today, we will break those seals. By the end of this story, you will see facsimiles of declassified documents with analysts' notes. You will meet the psychic agents who carried out operational missions for the Defense Intelligence Agency. And most importantly, you will understand why the truth about Project Stargate is far more complex, unsettling, and astonishing than the dry, official conclusion from the American Institutes for Research report, ineffective. To understand why that report is misleading, we must go back to the very beginning. And that beginning is not in the dark basements of Langley, but in the academic quiet of sun-drenched California. Picture it, the early 70s, the Stanford Research Institute. Here, two respected physicists, Russel Targ and Puthoff, are staking their scientific reputations. They aren't working on lasers or quantum mechanics as expected. Their experiment looks laughably simple. One person sits in a completely shielded room. Another, in a nearby building, receives a sealed envelope with a randomly chosen image. The first person's task, to describe that image, with the power of their mind. To the scientific world, this was pure madness, a reason for condescending smirks at conferences. But for the people at the CIA, who were secretly and very closely monitoring their work, it was something else entirely. What caught the attention of the stern pragmatists at the agency? Not mysticism, but a rigorous, repeatable, scientific protocol. Understand, Targ and Puthoff weren't trying to summon spirits. They implemented double-blind protocols. Neither the experimenter nor the subject knew which target was in the envelope. They meticulously collected statistics. They performed ruthless mathematical analysis. They wanted to prove that their subjects could identify targets with a probability that exceeded simple guesswork by orders of magnitude. And they succeeded. It was this data-driven approach that transformed a strange phenomenon from a parlor trick into a potential espionage tool. The CIA's logic was ironclad. If a person can see a drawing in an envelope with 65% accuracy, what's to stop them from seeing the contents of a Soviet nuclear bunker? This wasn't magic. It was a new asymmetric form of intelligence gathering. And here lay the biggest shock for everyone involved. The program wasn't founded by mediums. Its scientific fathers were specialists in laser technology, men with impeccable credentials. Their serious, non-mystical approach to the subject forced even the most hardened skeptics at the CIA to listen. They spoke the language of numbers, probabilities, and protocols. This changed everything. The initial successes at Stanford were intriguing, statistically significant, as prestigious journals like Nature reported. But for the harsh realities of espionage, this wasn't enough. They needed more than fragments of images. They needed concrete, verifiable details. To turn theory into a weapon, they didn't just need a volunteer. They needed someone with exceptional abilities, a kind of living calibration tool for the entire future program. And soon they found him. His name was Ingo Swann. He was neither a scientist nor a soldier. He was a New York artist, known in niche circles for his psychic abilities. In 1973, at the Stanford lab, physicists Targ and Puthoff gave him a task bordering on scientific heresy. They assigned him to look at the planet Jupiter. Think about it. At that time, even the world's best telescopes saw Jupiter as little more than a blurry disk with a few moons. Swann closed his eyes. A ringing silence filled the room. Then, in a flat, almost colorless voice, he began to describe what he couldn't possibly see. He spoke of a dense, churning atmosphere, of ice crystals within it. And most importantly, he made a sketch, a thin, faint ring around the planet, like Saturn's, but much paler. The scientific consensus, supported by data from every observatory, was categorical. Jupiter has no rings. But Ingo Swann was more than just a subject. He became the architect of the entire system. He discovered a key paradox. To get accurate information, he couldn't be given any hints. Only bare, context-free numbers. This led to his greatest innovation, coordinate remote viewing. The method was simple and brilliant in its counterintuitiveness. The viewer was given only a pair of geographic coordinates, latitude and longitude. That's it. No questions, no hints, just numbers on a piece of paper. This cut off any logical guesswork and left only pure, unprocessed perception. It was this strict protocol that became the steel framework of the entire Stargate program. For 6 long years, Ingo Swann's report gathered dust in the archives. His description of Jupiter's rings was considered a curious but inexplicable error. Then came March 1979. NASA's Voyager 1 probe flew within 280,000 kilometers of Jupiter's cloud tops and sent back the first detailed images to Earth. On one of them, to the absolute astonishment of scientists, was a thin, barely visible ring, exactly like the one Swann had described and sketched 6 years earlier. For the CIA, this was a turning point. It wasn't just a statistical coincidence. It was the first irrefutable ironclad proof that remote viewing could acquire information inaccessible by any other existing technological means. Ingo Swann had proven it was possible. His mind had brought back verifiable data from the depths of space, beating a multi-million-dollar space program by 6 years. But the gift of one genius is not a system. Now the military and intelligence communities faced a new, even more complex challenge. How do you turn a unique talent into a reliable, standardized military procedure? How do you teach ordinary officers to do what Swann could do? The answer was found in strict, step-by-step protocols designed to transform elusive intuition into a weapon of information warfare. Imagine a typical session. A sterile room at Fort Meade, Maryland. Inside, only two people, the viewer, who will do the looking, and the monitor, who guides him. On the table, just a stack of clean paper and a pen. No mysticism. The monitor hands the viewer a sealed envelope. Inside is a slip of paper, with 2 lines of numbers, the target's coordinates. The viewer places his hand on it. Silence. And he begins to speak. Not in sentences, but in short, abrupt descriptors. A feeling of metal, the smell of salt, something curved, man-made, cold. These are the first faint signals breaking through the static of his own mind. This coordinate remote viewing protocol was designed as a multi-stage filtering system. Its purpose was to separate the pure signal from the noise continuously generated by our brains. In the first stage, the viewer described only the most basic gestalts, hard or soft, living or non-living, textures, smells, sounds. Then, in subsequent stages, he was allowed to make quick sketches of shapes. Only in the final stages did he attempt to assemble these scattered sensory fragments into a coherent concept. The primary goal of the entire process was to prevent the left analytical hemisphere of the brain from engaging, to stop it from guessing. Because logic was the greatest enemy of pure perception. And here we arrive at the most counterintuitive rule of Project Stargate. It's called analytical overlay. Hundreds of sessions revealed an undeniable fact. The more a viewer knew about the target, the worse his results were. If he was told, "Describe a Soviet submarine," his brain would immediately feed him images from movies and books. He would start to fill in the blanks rather than perceive. Therefore, the best viewer was one who knew absolutely nothing, an empty vessel. This principle shatters the entire logic of traditional intelligence, where the more initial information you have, the better. Here it was the exact opposite. Context was poison, contaminating the channel. So they had a method. They had their first operators, trained under strict protocols. The program was ready for its baptism by fire. And it was the late 70s, the peak of the Cold War. There was no shortage of secret facilities, missing agents, and enemy technologies. It was time to test this mental weapon in the field, on real operational missions, where the price of failure was not just a failed experiment, but human lives and national security. In 1979, a Soviet Tu-22 bomber disappeared over the jungles of Zaire. It had crashed somewhere in the impenetrable swamps. Satellites were blind. Human intelligence was silent. The CIA was desperate. They needed to find the wreckage with its secret equipment before the KGB did. Having exhausted all other methods, someone at Langley called Fort Meade. A few hours later, viewer Joseph McMoneagle described the area, a small town, a primitive airstrip, the plain lying to the northeast, in swampy water. The lead was enough. A satellite, retasked to the specified area, found the wreckage among the foliage. This was a key success. Understand, the viewers didn't provide a mailing address. They acted as biological sensors, providing leads. In another case, psychic Pat Price, given only coordinates, accurately described the nuclear facility at Semipalatinsk. He drew gantry cranes, spherical plutonium storage units, and even described the manufacturing process. Analysts, with a chill, confirmed his data by comparing his drawings to satellite photos. Stargate's data wasn't the final word. It was a way to narrow the search area, save satellite, time, and direct other intelligence assets to the right spot. But for every success, there was a high-profile failure. In December 1981, Red Brigade's terrorists in Italy kidnapped General James Dozier. The Stargate team worked around the clock under immense pressure. Several viewers independently described the room where he was held: a cold stone floor, a barred window, the muffled sound of a shop on the ground floor. But no one could name the city. They saw the details, but not the geolocation. The general was rescued through conventional police work. This case painfully exposed the method's primary vulnerability, its frightening unreliability. The program existed in this state of flux, with incredible breakthroughs, followed by frustrating misses. It was both an invaluable tool and an unpredictable phenomenon that defied the laws of consistency. But among all the viewers, there was one man who repeatedly delivered consistently high, verifiable results. He became a living legend of the project, its most valuable asset. His personal number in the program was 01, Agent 01. His name was Joseph McMoneagle, and he was the complete opposite of Ingo Swann. Not a mystical artist, not a seeker of esoteric truths with a fire in his eyes. He was a career Army intelligence officer, a soldier to the bone, with the smell of gun oil ingrained in his skin and military discipline in his blood. He joined the project almost by accident. After a near-death experience left an invisible scar on his consciousness, he said something had permanently changed in his perception of the world, as if the lens through which he viewed reality had cracked. He didn't see it as a gift from above. He saw it as a side effect of trauma, a neurological glitch. When his superiors at the DIA learned of the program, they saw McMoneagle as the perfect candidate, disciplined, reliable, and with an inexplicable ability to see what he shouldn't be able to see. Inside the program, he was known as Viewer 1, and he justified that title with chilling efficiency. It is documented that Joseph McMoneagle participated in over 250 intelligence missions. He located Soviet Typhoon-class submarines in the roar of stormy seas, Iranian hostages in dusty basements, and Chinese nuclear facilities hidden deep in the mountains. His accuracy was so high and so valuable to national security that upon his retirement, he was awarded not a service medal, but the Legion of Merit. This is one of the highest military decorations in the United States, given for exceptionally meritorious conduct in the performance of outstanding services. Think about that. The U.S. government, to the sound of the national anthem, decorated a soldier for his psychic abilities applied in combat. But here is the paradox of McMoneagle, the key to his success. He was the best precisely because he didn't believe in magic. He approached remote viewing as a military discipline like marksmanship or celestial navigation. He trained for hours, cutting off any attempt by his mind to analyze or infer, that very analytical overlay, the main enemy of a clear signal. He wasn't a prophet speaking from a trance. He was an operator reading raw data from an unknown source, sensing it as textures, smells, and sudden flashes of geometry. He turned a mystical art into a routine, almost boring job, and that's what made him so frighteningly effective. The existence of an agent like McMoneagle should have settled all questions about the program's value. Here he was, living, breathing proof, a soldier, a hero decorated for psychic espionage. But even he, the perfect instrument, couldn't protect the project from its greatest enemy. This enemy wasn't across the ocean. It sat in the air-conditioned offices of the Pentagon and the CIA. And its name was scientific skepticism, as cold and hard as granite. The walls around America's most secret program began to slowly but relentlessly close in. By the early 90s, the CIA's patience had run out. The program, which had cost more than $20 million, needed a final verdict. For this, they brought in an outsider, a psychologist named Ray Hyman, a well-known and respected skeptic. It was a clash of two universes. On one side were the military officers and physicists who had witnessed the inexplicable for 2 decades. They had heard people describe secret facilities based on nothing but coordinates. On the other side was a scientist who demanded proof as cold as steel. Not stories, not lucky coincidences, but rigorous, repeatable experiments that met the gold standard of science. And he didn't see them. He saw only methodological loopholes and the potential for self-deception. The final report, prepared in 1995 by the American Institutes for Research, was as ruthless as a scalpel. Its essence boiled down to one devastating conclusion. Yes, the psychics sometimes produced correct information. But, the report claimed, there was not a single documented case where the Stargate program had provided valuable operational intelligence that could not have been obtained through other traditional means. Understand their logic. The information was too vague, too symbolic, like images from a dream. It always required interpretation. And when data needs to be interpreted, there's always a risk of mistaking wishful thinking for reality. Your brain is a master at finding patterns where none exist. And here, the conflict reached its peak. Was the program a useless charade, a $20 million mistake? Or was science, with its rigid criteria, simply incapable of measuring a phenomenon that didn't obey its laws? The project's defenders argued they were being judged by the wrong rules. That demanding 100% accuracy from a psychic was like demanding a baseball player hit every single ball. They said remote viewing wasn't a crystal-clear photograph. It was a weak, intermittent signal in a sea of noise that had to be fished out with immense patience. And that even 1% of unique information, unobtainable otherwise, justified the program's existence. But in the halls of power, no one cared about that question anymore. The answer no longer mattered. The official verdict had been delivered. The judgment, printed on official letterhead, read, "Ineffective." In 1995, after 22 years of secret work, Project Stargate was terminated. The order was carried out immediately, with bureaucratic swiftness. But the government was left with one problem, as vast as an iceberg. What to do with the archives? What to do with tens of thousands of pages of mission reports, protocols, drawings, and audio recordings of sessions? The answer was simple and radical. Declassify it, all of it. Release it into the public domain and let history be the judge. Imagine that day in 1995. The quiet, echoing corridors of Fort Meade, smelling of linoleum and disappointment. The last employees of the program silently pack up their desks. They place what were once state secrets into cardboard boxes, reports on the search for Gaddafi, uncertain pencil sketches of Soviet submarines, transcripts of sessions where people with closed eyes tried to look into the future. Then, the boxes are stamped with the dull thud of a rubber stamp, declassified, and they are sent to the National Archives. the story is officially over. The book is slammed shut with a dry crack. The lights are turned off. But as soon as these documents became public, something completely unexpected happened. Project Stargate didn't die. It was reborn. The declassified archives, made freely available online, became a goldmine for researchers and former participants. Now they could speak freely. Dozens of books appeared, training courses, documentaries. The program that the government had buried under a ton of bureaucracy found a new, loud life in popular culture. The ghosts from the archives had broken free, whispering their stories from yellowed pages. And the deeper people delved into these files, the more questions arose about the official reason for its closure. They saw that the final report was biased, that its authors had deliberately ignored successful missions while highlighting failures. They found cases where viewers had described secret facilities with incredible accuracy, facilities that conventional intelligence did not yet know about, like that nuclear center in Semipalatinsk. The official story began to crack at the seams. Perhaps the truth had been buried too deep, under the weight of scientifically based conclusions. And so here we are. The program is officially dead. Its archives hum on thousands of servers around the world. But the central question that Project Stargate posed to the world remains unanswered. It hangs in the air like an unfinished melody. This question has been hanging there for a quarter of a century, only growing louder. And it brings us to the most important point, to the finale of this incredible, chillingly real story. So what was Project Stargate? If we strip away all the theories and speculation, what remains is an astonishing historical fact. At the height of the Cold War, during the peak of the arms race, the most rational and powerful government in the world invested over $20 million and 22 years into studying the most irrational phenomenon, human intuition. This was not a whim or a belief in the supernatural. It was an act of cold, desperate pragmatism. When the survival of a nation is at stake, you are obligated to explore every possibility, even one that seems insane and makes your own scientists clench their fists in frustration. The fates of the main figures in this saga varied. Physicists Russel Targ and Puthoff left government projects but did not abandon their research. They wrote books and scientific papers, trying until the end of their days to prove to the scientific community that the phenomenon they discovered in the labs of Stanford was real. Joseph McMoneagle, Agent 001, retired and became one of the most famous civilian remote viewing specialists, founding his own company. They never renounced their beliefs. For them, the Stargate never closed. It simply operated under a new banner. And this leads us to the final, most unsettling thought. What if the program wasn't shut down because it didn't work? What if it was shut down precisely because it did work, but was as utterly unpredictable as a wild animal? The military machine is built on precision, control, and 100% repeatability. A missile must fly where it is aimed. A cipher machine must operate according to its algorithm. But remote viewing was something else. It was capricious, unstable, uncontrollable. Perhaps to the Pentagon, there was nothing more terrifying than a weapon that decides for itself when to fire. A weapon that depends not on microchips, but on the mood, health, and faith of its operator. Ultimately, the story of Project Stargate leaves us with a choice. Just two options, two folders on the table. The first, it was a grand 22-year waste of money on a group of charlatans, self-deception, and a series of lucky coincidences. The second It was real, government-documented proof that human consciousness possesses a hidden, immeasurable potential that we don't understand and are perhaps even afraid to acknowledge. So, what was it? Tell us what you think. One word: waste or potential?